It's hosted a rally and protest with the theme, Liberty Starts Here Again. They called it the start of the second revolution, a revolution to take our country back. I did some research from history books that have been purged from our libraries. Liberty did start here in New York, and New York is a leader. Like all of you here today and Mr. Payne just mentioned, you are leaders today. Part of many rallies in New York and across the nation today, 1,200 at least rallies of Tea Party patriots. And they say history repeats itself. From 1670 to the mid-1700s, New York was the first meeting place to discuss a union and protections of liberty and property. Remember this right now. Taxation was considered an attack on property. Whenever you pay taxes, think about that. They originally thought, and we should still keep on thinking, taxation is considered an attack on property. Protests grew common to the cry, liberty and property. This is exactly what we're experiencing right now. Excessive taxation in all categories. In 1764, during parliamentary debate on a proposed Stamp Act, one member declared that Americans are sons of liberty, not children of England's planting. You today, patriots, are the sons and daughters of liberty. In 1765, after about a year of persistent yet respectful opposition from the colonies, the Stamp Act taxation was passed. Violators would be tried without a jury trial. The people rose up in numbers and more boldly demonstrated their opposition. The Sons of Liberty started in New York, and chapters quickly spread to almost all colonies. New York held a bonfire in the public square. They were protesting in the public square just like we are today. In October of 1765, the Stamp Act Congress met in New York and adopted a Declaration of Rights. The people of New York cried out, "Let us see who will dare put the act into execution." The colonies, following New York's lead, were unanimously resolved on nullifying the Stamp Act, even so much that the children playing in the streets sang, "Liberty, property, and no stamps." We should teach our children, and we should act so that they can also sing the same as the children of the past, liberty, property, and no taxes. The British did not expect such a strong resistance from the colonies. Just like right now, our government is not expecting this resistance. They're ignoring it. They're ridiculing it. In 1766, the Stamp Act was repealed. In celebration, a liberty pole was erected in New York City Hall Park. But the celebration was short-lived because the Stamp Act was replaced by the Declaratory Act, by which Parliament claimed power over the colonies in all cases whatsoever. Sounds like the cap and trade. They want to declare power over all parts of our lives. New York State says we are sick of it. In 1767, they brought more acts of oppression by imposing more duties, and the Billeting Act requiring colonists to lodge and feed British troops, the same troops that were put in place to oppress the people. The colonies were being driven to rebellion, with New York strongly leading the opposition. In May 1767, Parliament decided to assert its sovereignty and to proceed against New York and against New York alone. We know now New York taxes are the highest in the entire nation. Our taxes on gasoline alone beat out even California for both federal and New York state taxes. Why are we paying such a high price? The taxation. Back then, the penalty would be a local tax and loss of all legislative privileges. They did not want to hear the people. Until they complied, Parliament continued to debate the best mode of coercing New York. August 1767, an intimate correspondence grew up between New York and Boston. They would nullify the Townsend's Revenue Act by consuming nothing on which he had laid a duty. Colonists agreed to buy no goods from England until the Revenue Act was repealed. 1768, when New York clearly refused to obey the Billeting Act, Parliament suspended its legislative functions, just as they threatened. 1769, the Agreement of Non-Importation originated in New York, where it was rigidly carried into effect with other colonies following the example of New York. By 1770, New York's Liberty Pole had stood safely in the park for nearly 3 years, but soldiers finally became exasperated against the citizens and succeeded in cutting it down after 3 attempts resisted by the crowds. 3,000 people who consider the soldiers as enemies of the Constitution. Doesn't that sound familiar today? They gathered in the fields and skirmished with the soldiers for 2 days. The newspapers reported a people's victory. The Sons of Liberty of New York then erected a new Liberty Pole on purchased land, private land, protected it by iron bands and bars, and inscribed it with the words liberty and property. By June 1770, New York alone had been perfectly true to its non-importation agreements, but trade between England and the other American colonies opened again in everything but tea. Where did we get our name? By the end of 1773, the expected tea shipments from England arrived in the colonies. In Boston, the ship did not have a pass, so leaving the harbor was not an option. The tea had to be unloaded with duty or confiscated. On December 16, 1773, men disguised as Indians dumped 340 chests of tea from 3 ships into Boston Harbor. Tea shipped for the other cities either perished on land or was sent back to London, including New York's. Now think of that date, December 16th. That was winter. That was Boston Harbor. Thousands, 2,000 to 3,000 people were out there during this protest. We can't complain about the little bit of wind and breeze and possible rain today. In 1774, the Sons of Liberty of New York were the first to propose a General Congress for unity on the side of liberty. This was the beginning of the Continental Congress and the last but probably the greatest, the grand finale achievement of the Sons of Liberty of New York. Assemblies for independence were held in many towns of New York. Notably, the first and second constitutional conventions were held in Fishkill. We held the beginning of the Second Revolution in Albany. Now here in New York, we are considered the sons and daughters of liberty. We crave liberty. And as we say, the rest is history. 1776 saw the colonies adopting independent constitutions with the power not surrendered to a limited government, but reserved solely and directly to a sovereign people. Still a limited power government. A side note before I finish. About a month ago, I read that more people are moving out of New York than every other state in the nation. Quote, when more people are leaving than coming in, even politicians should recognize something is wrong, unquote. I also read that New York is considered the least free state. But when people think of New York, they think of the Statue of Liberty. When they look at the commemorative quarter, they read Gateway to Freedom. Yet isn't it ironic that New York, and very sad, probably the most active in securing our liberties and freedoms over 200 years ago, has a distinction of the least free state and least favored state to live in? We have to stand up. Jumping back to the history, was it about taxation without representation alone? No. The recurring call was for liberty and property. People's rights to assemble and to govern themselves. This is why we are here today. New York led the Patriots. New York led the Union of the people, by the people, and for the people. And now we can follow what Albany has said. Liberty starts here again, New York. May our government experience another unexpected resistance because of their attacks on our liberty and property, excessive taxation. For our children and our children's children, the Patriots are silent no more. We want to take our nation back, from an out-of-control government.